It's easy to feel like your entire job as a parent is about controlling behaviors.
This is a relationship. It's not a job. I am not getting evaluated at the end of it by an employer. I am here for life with this little soul who's been entrusted to me.
There's this gap between behaviors that, I don't want happening in public versus having that relationship.
It takes a lot of courage, I think, to say as a parent, I'm on this journey too. I'm not actually engineering it.
Welcome back to Happiness in Progress. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I am an Emmy Award-winning journalist, and this podcast is in the top 1% of all podcasts. I am so glad you're here today. Today, we are talking about parenting and how to shift from behavior control to raising a soul. Let's get to it.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I am so excited to chat with you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I think when we think about parenting and we think about it historically, it really has been about behavior control. There's all of those things you hear, children should be seen and not heard,
Yes.
My house, my rules, like all of those phrases, maybe that bring up some traumatic memories. But why does it matter that we make a choice to lean away from behavior control and toward that reciprocal relationship?
Well, I want to say a couple of things about that. First of all, I want to give your listeners a very brief history about why we're so focused on behavioral control, because I don't think people really understand that part of what's happening here is that developmental psychology as a field is actually very young in the scientific world. And so parenting advice was written up by pediatricians, other parents, often women, in the sort of, I collect these great books from like the early 1900s, the late 1800s, that are chock full of advice for women about how to be a wife and mother. And there's a lot of advice in there about parenting kids, mainly keeping them quiet, out of your husband's hair, making sure they're polite in public. And then what happened wonderfully is that we had just a burst in the scientific field, and we really started to understand what contributes to positive child development. For reasons I don't entirely understand, the popular influencer-y advice, a lot of the most popular books on the bookshelves, are actually still continuing the advice that we were giving out more than 100 years ago without the benefit of scientific evidence. And so I just want the listeners to sort of know that, first of all, that it's not so much that I'm offering this new weird paradigm against kind of the dominant norm. What I'm really trying to do is say this advice is really outdated, and all parents should know what the science actually says.
Yeah.
So the substantive answer to your question, why do we need to shift gears, is for really a million reasons. But to put it really succinctly, what we know best from 100 years of developmental psychology research is that the children who flourish in this world have strong, reciprocal, loving relationships with at least one nurturing caregiver.
Wow, that's a lot of, I can feel the pressure of that. Before we go on, I want to circle back around. Did you say today, like influencer parenting books are kind of still giving that advice, of that control advice?
Oh, it's exactly the same. I actually collect these old books because I find them really interesting for lots of reasons. And I have a couple of times shown folks like a page out of an old book from 100 years ago next to like a meme from a popular parenting influencer, and it's the same advice. Now, today people are dressing it up with the language of science. They're using words like wire your child's brain and, 5 fast facts to raise kind kids. But then if you look at what actually they're suggesting, it's entirely about teaching children how to suppress what they feel, maintain a neutral and even sort of robotic behavioral profile. And it's the same advice for the parent. Calm down, lower your affect. Anything that feels personal to you in the moment should really be kind of carved out with a scalpel and left outside of this minute. And what children really benefit most from is that real human dynamic with someone who really loves them, who is working through the moment alongside them. That's how children learn anything in terms of social emotional development. That's how they learn how to be people in relationships, how to solve problems and communicate and use the emotional information that's coming in wisely.
So, is there something that we as parents and consumers of information can be on the lookout when we're, going through Instagram and we're seeing all of this advice? We're trying to, we're part of the reason we're bringing this information in is because
Yeah.
we want to be good parents.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole thing. I have I have worked with parents in the clinical field for many, many years, including a period of time working with really high risk families where there are abuse and neglect petitions. And I will still tell you that it is the rare experience I've had to meet a parent who is not trying their absolute best.
Mm.
The short answer, if I'm being really honest, Danielle, is that I don't really think that it's easy for the average parent to be able to filter what's good advice from not good advice. I think people are really good at marketing themselves these days, and I have a lot of empathy for parents who are trying to learn the best way they can. And if someone has a million followers and everyone else is saying they're great, it's really, really hard to be someone who's like, I don't know about that advice. But one thing I will tell people that I think we all can see coming, because it is so clear in the research. And I keep saying that because if you've ever kind of dug into psychological or developmental research, what you'll know is that it reads overall kind of like a great debate and conversation. There's one study that'll say this matters, and there'll be another study that says, well, maybe not as much as we thought, or not in this way. And so it actually is extremely important that we know without a shadow of a doubt that thriving children have solid, deep, loving, reciprocal connections with the adults in their lives. And so if you're reading content online where it seems like the person is sort of creating an us versus them dynamic between parents and children, or sort of encouraging parents to put behavioral control first and foremost without context, like what value are you trying to teach? Why is it important to pick this hill to die on exactly right now? If that's not the context of the advice, you would be wise to be a little suspicious.
Okay. Well, we're going to go back to that behavioral control, but first let's lay the foundation of that relationship. Why that matters, and how you build that really strong relationship with your child.
Well, I do think the very first thing it takes is some courage, because I think what you really have to be able to do is say, this is a human being, and that human being has free will. And I can't project what trials and tribulations this person is going to go through or that we're going to go through together. I just can't. No amount of anxiety and swirling in my own head is really going to let me foresee the future. I just can't. I have to let that go. And I have to sort of embrace this is what this life is holding for us. It takes a lot of courage, I think, to say as a parent, I'm on this journey too. I'm not actually engineering it. I think it takes a lot of courage to be able to say, I can listen to my child and still know that that won't mean I'm going to lose sort of control of the ship overall. And I think it takes a lot of courage to shut out other people's voices who are saying there is a single right way to parent so that you can get a single set of behavioral outcomes. I think that takes courage. So I think the first thing I tell parents is you kind of have to get right with yourself first. You have to really be able to say, this is a relationship. It's not a job. I am not getting evaluated at the end of it by an employer. I am here for life with this little soul who's been entrusted to me. And if I sort of orient myself to this person over and over with that in mind, it really organically opens up so many opportunities and possibilities to connect and to relate and to work through things together and to grow together.
I love that you said it takes courage because you've probably seen Finding Nemo. Seen
Oh, yeah.
Finding Nemo?
Yeah.
I relate to that dad of Nemo because he's like such a control freak, but that
Yeah.
control was built on the trauma of losing all of his other kids and
Mm.
his wife. And so he's like, I really looked too deep into this. I saw it as a kids play, like it was like Finding Nemo Jr. put
Yes.
on by the elementary school, and I'm
Yeah.
literally bawling.
Ah.
But but that's when I realized, oh my gosh, okay, so I'm a NICU mom,
Mm.
and I started out parenthood in the NICU,
Mm.
and then 1 year later, that same child anaphylaxed to peanuts. And so I just like the control, was like, how do I keep him safe in this really scary world? And what I've really had to unlearn is that control, the behavioral control, just control about the whole circumstances. Because really, I like what you said about I can't engineer his whole life. And no matter what I do today, there are things I can do and teach him, of course, to help him with safety, like put up the guardrails kind of thing. But if I am hyper controlling, I
Mhm.
really like, when he's 25, he's he's doing his own thing regardless. So I really
Mm.
can't let all of that control get in the way of building that relationship.
I think that that is so beautiful and so vulnerable how you're explaining that through your experiences. And if you don't mind, something I want to observe and kind of add to it is that there's really a difference between having the courage to say, there's going to be lots of factors that are going to create outcomes besides my own
Mm,
intentionality. But I still think what we have to say is, but I am still important. And what is the way in which I actually can make big contributions? If what I can't do is erase the possibility of danger, what can I do? So, where that has led me is to say, well, if I accept that stress and trauma are ordinary human phenomenon, and by the way, they are. That is a science-backed idea. That is millions of years of evolution and all the stuff,
hmm
right? Like we just know that part of being human is to experience stress and trauma. So if I have the courage to accept that as fact, well, then what? And the then what for me is, well, then I have to shepherd and scaffold and support and help my little human over time know how to manage stress, to problem solve, to use what he or she or they feel to make wise decisions. And so that's just where I put all of my energy. All because I have that too. We all have that. All parents who care and love and who are invested think so hard about how to make life the best we possibly can for our kids. And so I just want to be clear that I'm never going to say try to care less, try to tone it down. I'm actually saying amplify it, but just make sure you're putting that energy into a place that you can actually make real impact.
Yeah. And I think some of the controlling behaviors took away his opportunity to build his own independence and build trust in himself and his ability to make good decisions. Do you know what I mean? So I probably had this epiphany 3 to 5 years ago. So as I've kind of said, well, what do you think about that? Or how do we solve this problem? Or what are you going to do about them serving peanuts at this? Or what are you going to do about this friend situation? Or here's some of my thoughts, but not so much delivered in a lecture, which might have been my my go-to originally. I have seen so much confidence in him.
I love that so much. Now, do you mind? I'm also going to kind of weigh in a little bit here,
Yeah.
not having known you then, but just responding to this story and how similar it is to stories I hear from parents. And I'm hearing you say, well, I did this thing before that I think got in his way, and then I learned from it. And then I started doing this other thing, and I saw this great kind of outcome from it. And I feel good about that. But what I really also want to kind of illuminate here, and this is the point of it being a relationship, is that also in the period of time where you didn't know what to do and you were doing your best, you were still teaching him something. And that was the period where you were saying to him, this is very serious. We have to take it very seriously. It was the period of time where you were saying to him, and before I can trust you to do this on your own, I'm doing it for you. So you know that you are safe and loved. And then as you slowly were able to hand it over to him, it probably needed that foundation for both of you so
Mm.
that you both could trust that it was time. And so that is as much the point of just really being in it, being connected, doing your best with what you feel in the moment instead of trying to be super like, there's probably a right way to handle this and it's not what I'm doing and I need to figure it out, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also it was age appropriate. He's a
Yes,
teenager now.
that's right.
Whereas at
That's
one
right.
point he was two. And
Right.
so there's definitely a different needs from him. I
Yeah.
really love this idea of transitioning from a behavior coach to considering your child as a little soul. Talk
Yeah.
me through you making that transition.
Yeah. So, as I said, sort of that step one is just to have the courage to say, this is a whole human. And I'm a whole human, by the way. Listen, maybe there's people out there who do feel this way, but most of us start out parenthood feeling like, me? They're sending a whole person home with me and I'm supposed to raise them. I'm still raising myself, right? We still all feel that way. We're all still in progress. And so the courage to just surrender to that and say that's normal. That's how people feel. That doesn't mean I'm at deficit and I need to catch up. That is the first place to start. The second place then is to say, okay, what is my big picture mission here? What am I always going to come back to in the micro, tiny decisions of everyday parenting life? Should I enroll them in one more dance class? Do I need to step in with homework or let them handle it? All those tiny decisions we make about behaviors and about logistics. What's it rooted in? What is it I actually believe in? What do I think the job of a parent is? I think all parents should just start and kind of meditate on that for a minute. What is it I think I'm here to do? And then the second thing is, what do I want my child at the end of the day to say? I know that these three things really matter to my parents above all else. And then I put a lot of energy into making sure that those values are not just role modeled by me, talked about in low stakes moments, but
Mm.
even when I'm making decisions that are maybe behavioral, maybe these tiny little things, I'm still saying out loud to my kids, this is the decision I'm making, or this is the advice I'm giving, or this is what I want you to do. And the reason is, and then I'm giving them that context. So, what I'm hoping to grow over time is, first of all, a relationship where they know no matter what, whether I make mistakes, whether I don't make mistakes, whatever, I'm always being guided by something. I'm always saying to them, I'm trying to make sure that we always put this thing first. But then I'm also saying one day I'm not going to be standing next to you. And I want there to be a sort of really clear voice in your head through which you're making wise decisions. And that's
Mhm.
where it begins.
I think it's so easy to get caught up in the we just got to survive the day.
Yes.
I'm going to get you to school and we're going to get you
Yes.
back and we're going to get all these things done. And sometimes I think in that just getting through the day, we forget the values and we leave the values behind and we haven't kind of intertwined them in those what you called the low stake moments. What are some value ideas that can get our listeners kind of thinking?
Well, everybody who's listening, I really want you to think about the word kindness. And here's why. When I ask parents in a clinical setting or in an educational setting, what is your number one family value? Absolutely everyone starts with kindness.
Wow.
And then I say back to them, I just want to be clear with you. I am completely agnostic about what you choose. It is okay for you to say to me what we value most is winning and we really want our kids to be winners. And I will say, that is your choice. And let me help you make sure that you are just being really clear with your kids. Like, these are how we're making decisions. And they still say back to me, our first number one family value is kindness. Here's why this is a problem. Most people have not defined for themselves what that means. And I would say at least 50% of the time, what they're really still caught up in is I want my child's behavior in private and in public to not create problems.
Mm.
And that comes back to it really being like, I just can't knit myself out of the trap of trying to sort of control their behavior instead of shaping who they are. So I also think at the same time, when people then really are forced to think about it, well, what do I mean? Then people do say, well, I guess what I really care about is. And I think the clearer you can be with yourself, with your children, and in general, as you talk about what you value, the more you're going to find it's organic and your kids can see it and also hear it and then feel it.
Okay. If you're like, okay, it is winning, or it is something that you're like, maybe that's not what I want it to be, and I do want it to be kindness or
Right.
some kind of love, some kind of value that you feel good about saying out loud. Um, is there a way to, transition that or kind of change that?
So we all have what I call the heart song. And that's the thing that we value, that we like really value. It really shapes who we are. And then there's a bubble for aspirational values. That's the stuff
Mm.
that we think we should value. I call those the New Year's resolutions, right? Like I should value them. I'm going to work, I'm going to try, but then at some point you slide back. Then there's a third bubble. These are the values I actually walk. And the goal is for those bubbles to converge. So, what I would say is that you can't change what you care about. That is sort of shaped over a lifetime. But what you can do is interrogate it. So let's say you have a value like, well, ooh, I think it's great to win, right? I do find that that's the value I'm walking, that that's really what in my heart, when I'm having to work a little extra harder, that's where the intrinsic motivation comes from. I would say just interrogate that, talk with a friend about it. Where does it come from? Who told you that was important? Why was it important to them? So, for example, there are children or grandchildren of immigrants who might say, I was always told that in order to do the things I want to do in the world, to be able to provide for my family, to contribute back, to make this world better, I have to keep competing and keep achieving and earn everything that's ever going to come to me. And that's what I
Mm.
call winning. And so then what you might say to yourself is, oh, so it's not exactly like I'm just fed by a gold star. Really, the value is that I think it's really important to work as hard as you can and to keep sort of moving up the rungs of society, because you can see and you've been told and you've been shown that when you do that, that is the best way to be able to make big impacts. And you can then talk that out with your kids. What is
Yeah,
that going to mean
wow.
for you? How are you going to make sure that you are participating in this world in a way that positions you to really do good?
Wow. Yeah, I love being able to talk that out. Okay, I promised that we'd go back to the behavior control because even as we have this conversation, it's like, well, there's this gap between behaviors that I don't want happening in public or maybe even in my home versus having that relationship and making sure I'm focusing on relationships. So, how do you deal
Yeah,
with that? There's still behaviors that shouldn't be
right,
happening.
right.
I feel like I need to parent those, maybe control those to some extent. But I want to have this loving relationship and where I'm building values and helping him or her create this, um, create their independence.
Yeah. So there's two answers I want to give to this. Like the bottom line, like, okay, but still part of our job is to protect and support and care for children behaviorally. Okay. So the first answer to that is that sometimes the reason we're kind of like, I don't know what to do about this is because the answer has not arrived yet. There isn't an easy answer. It's not because somebody smarter or better in that moment would be able to control the behavior. So the first thing I really want parents to understand about behavior and about those moments when it just feels like conflict is escalating is that it's okay not to know things. And it's okay to say out loud. I say out loud to my kids, I really don't know what to do right now. I am also feeling really helpless like you are. And that's why we're fighting. And I just don't
Mm,
know what to do. And I know we're going to find the answer together. So I always take the opportunity to say, we're still in this together. It feels like we're on opposite sides, but we're not. I just don't really know how to fix this. And then what I say is, what is the actual problem. So the example I like to give is a parent's fighting with a child. I just helped a parent with this actually recently. The child never wants to get in the bathtub, and the parent's like, "You have to take a bath," and the kid's like, "No." And I'm like, "What's the problem, though? Do we know what the problem is?" Okay, so the parent would say, "Well, he has to get clean sometimes." And I think the kid, and I was right, would say, "I don't like being cold."
Mm,
And so then if you can really talk out what's the actual problem we're trying to solve. The problem isn't that we don't agree. That's not the problem. The problem we have to solve together is you have to be clean and also comfortable. So how are we going to achieve that? Even toddlers, even small kids can participate in that back and forth to some degree, right? Where we start to say, okay, well, how do we get clean but also stay warm? Let's talk that out. Brainstorm some things. Let's see if we can experiment. Let's see if we can try. Now, what you're teaching your child in the midst of conflict is this is actually what we do when we're feeling confused and helpless and we don't have an answer. We have to work the problem. And look how well it works to problem solve with another person. Two heads are better than one. That's a great skill for life that I'm teaching you. The
mm,
other thing that I would say about behavior is that sometimes we have to control behavior for the sake of controlling behavior. I want that to get moved to a minority of times for parents. I want it to not be the focus. But there are sometimes for safety reasons, you just can't throw yourself on the ground here. It will be a big problem and you don't know how unsafe it is. Right. And then in life, that's going to be true that you just can't have an outburst right here, right now, in front of that person. It could be dangerous for you.
mm,
And so, what I say in those moments, first of all, I make sure I'm being very clear that that's actually what's happening. And then I say it out loud like, I can't solve this problem and you can't either. But if you lay on the ground here and kick and scream, I'm worried that this is going to happen. And so, for right now, we have to move. We have to get into the car. We have to go home. I have to keep you away from your sibling who you're hitting.
mm-hmm,
And then I want to try to solve the problem with you.
mm-hmm. I love that. The getting the kids engaged in the problem solving also gives them some kind of buy-in. I
Mhm.
also have a son on the spectrum, and when he was maybe in first or second grade, he just wouldn't ever write and wouldn't do any assignments, never would write things down. And so, I asked him. I had read this in a book. I asked him, "What's up? I noticed you're not writing, wanting to write. What's up?" And he said, "It hurts my hand." And so then
Yeah.
we brainstormed ways to work around this, and he came up with in his little mind, first or second grade, he came up with the idea that he wanted to buy some pencil grips. And so we went onto Amazon, we found pencil grips, and it was enough that he was engaged in his own problem solving. And as he's gotten older, we've continued to involve him in that conversation, and it's turned into it would just be much easier if I could type my assignments. And so we've been like, okay, you can type your assignments. And it's just been neat that he's been able to solve that problem for himself.
And what you're also describing is that you shifted what he sees as the problem from the problem is what I feel, and I need to
Hmm.
just not feel it, which isn't possible.
Yeah.
You shifted it to you feel uncomfortable, and I get it. And also, there's limitations, really, right, to the choices we have here. So, within the choices, what do we do? And that can make all the difference to kids. That is another example of how you cultivate a relationship rather than control behavior. Because
Hmm.
now he knows in even increasingly complicated moments, I can tell my mom what I'm feeling about this and she won't think it's weird or wrong. And then we can come up with a solution together.
Oh, I love that. Okay, I really quickly just want to ask two more questions. So
Yes.
one is, okay, in public, you want to control behaviors. You mentioned the safety, like let's control behaviors when there's a safety issue. I was at a church event. It was like very, serious, and people were quiet. And there was a kid not in my family who was like 1 or 2 years old who was climbing up on the church pew and just jumping off the back and hitting the floor. And I was just thinking, I would never have let my kids do that. And why wouldn't I have let my kids do that? And I was kind of like unraveling this. I'm like super, super controlling. I'm like, was it detrimental to my kids to force them to not do that? But at the same time, I don't want them jumping off the pew. And I could say maybe there's a safety issue, but more so it would be like, you know, you're interrupting other people's like worship time. You're possibly could break something, and maybe you could slam your head on something. So I was kind of trying to digest this for myself and kind of unravel it in what is the space between letting my kid jump off the pew and forcing them to sit down or taking them out if they're out of control. What would be the balance there?
I love the example you're giving, and I just want you to know that I live this. I'm Jewish, and we go to services weekly, and I've raised young kids, and I want them in the sanctuary, and I know exactly that feeling. And what I want to reflect back to you is that you named a value right there. You said other people are here to worship, and this feels good to you, and yet the impact on other people is a problem. That's how I talk to my kids about it.
Mm,
Exactly. And then I lay it out there for them. I just say, this really isn't a good place to do that, because did you notice how other people seem to feel? Did you notice their faces? Did you notice their body language? And you're a person here too. So also, I'm happy to ask them to make space for what feels good to you. Like my younger one likes to, instead of sitting in a seat, she'll sit on the floor and color. And people have to just accept that there's a child in the sanctuary coloring. That's not detracting from their ability
right.
to pray. But I also wouldn't say this whole place belongs only to you. Run around, make noise, do whatever you want, because I care very deeply about them growing up with a value of community citizenship. And
Mm,
so I think what you're doing exactly is the thing, that you're wrestling with it. And then we can be transparent about that with our kids, about that kind of wrestling, invite them into it, and then say, so what do we do? And that conversation is how we even came up with the idea of bringing a little backpack with coloring and some activities that were quiet. Because we said, here's what we can do, here's what we can't do, here's why. What are some ideas we can generate as a family?
okay. I think what I'm learning from this is, first of all, I can have a little bit of grace with my parenting. And second of
Yes.
all, I want to take the moment to think about, why is the behavior control in this moment important to me? And then being able to relay that to my kids. I think that what I'm kind of gonna leave this conversation as a goal with.
Yeah, what I'm doing right now? Who is this for? And what is my why?
I want to give you my last question that I ask
Yes,
everyone, which is, what is your
please.
number one tip to finding more joy in the good, the bad, and the in between?
Well, when it comes to parenting, my number one tip, when you're relating to children like they are these little souls that you get to be in life with, is really get to know them, not just for the purposes of then trying to make your next parenting decision, but listen to the music they like. Watch them when they're doing a silly dance, and if they'll let you, get in on it. And it's not just because these little moments spark some sort of pleasure and joy, it's because that is also part of building a relationship together. And joy isn't just for joy's sake, although that should be important enough, but it promotes learning and bonding and overall thriving for everyone in the family.
We didn't get to this, and I was hoping we'd have time, but I love the idea of observing your child as a researcher and wondering about them, asking questions maybe that you would ask a friend that you were interested to hear things about rather than, how was school today?
Right. Yeah,
And
they
so,
don't want to tell you. I know you need to go, but they don't interview them at the end of the day. They don't want to just regurgitate back what they did. I don't want to either. When my husband's like, "How was work?" I'm like, "Do I have to relive it? Like it was emotional and big and a lot, and that's not what I want to talk about, right?" But yeah, really get to know them. That's the stuff of life.
Yeah, I love that. Last night, I just had a late night conversation with my 13-year-old, and I was thinking, this is it. Like, this is the point. And I just absolutely loved that time. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Of course, I'm going to put all your information in show notes. You've got a lot of valuable information out there, and I'm so excited that we connected.
Me too. It was so great to get to know you. Thanks, Danielle.
I hope you liked this conversation as much as I did. I love remembering that our kids are their own little souls, their own little people. And I love thinking about parenting them through that lens rather than I must control them at all times. I'm going to go forward from this conversation and really get clear on what our family values are. I'm going to have that conversation with my husband and then bring in our kids for a family meeting, which, by the way, I just really think they love family meetings. Okay, they don't. But we're going to have a little family meeting and we'll kind of get their perception of what our values are and see if we can kind of just involve them in that conversation of what our family values are. And with that, I want to thank you for being here on Happiness and Progress. Don't forget to check out show notes and please leave a rating while you're there. I'm so glad you're here and I appreciate your time and I hope you have a great day. I'll see you back here on Happiness and Progress.